Hello, I'm Michael Gaucher, and it is February 16, 2026. It's approximately 6 p.m. And I'm going to talk about three things today. I'm going to talk about the state of AI as I see it. I'm going to talk about something that I did with AI about 2 months ago and where that ended up. And then I'm going to talk about what AI means for software developers, but how that also relates to other areas of work and industry and life. So many have heard that OpenAI has purchased Claudebot or Multibot or whatever the name it is. And the purchase of this particular implementation of AI is going to give OpenAI capabilities that are similar to Manus, which is an AI that can do just about anything and that can manage your computer and manage things on your computer very capably. And this makes OpenAI's implementation of the Claudebot technology competitive with Anthropic's Cowork. So Anthropic has this product that they call Cowork, which basically allows the Claude agents to do all kinds of things on your computer on your behalf. It allows you to do things faster, and it allows you to do things that would take you a lot of time and do it in a fraction of the time with the right prompts or interaction with the Cowork system. So OpenAI is positioning themselves to have something very similar, if not in a completely different direction. And so you're going to have these AI agents that are going to be able to very capably do things. And I think that's very interesting. I don't see much room for concern. I know people were concerned about AI years ago having the aspect of Skynet, like you would see in some of the Terminator movies, where the AI takes on a mind of its own and is able to go out there and wreak havoc in the world and just really create problems for people in general. And I've had some videos where I've described my reasons for why I don't think that will happen. But in a nutshell, the AI does very good in creating documents and holding conversations and executing tools. But it is not a mind. And human beings have not designed computers as a tool that is itself a mind. And unfortunately, we used phrases in the past to try to get across certain concepts in computers, like CPUs. We used to call that the brain of the computer, right? And so that is not actually accurate, right? The ability to calculate and formulate logic is not the same as thinking. Thinking, as it applies to biological beings like dogs, cats, humans, and insects, is not the same as what we have as a IT community designed in the computing devices. Unfortunately, we as human beings, we really like our stories. And the stories that have been told in Hollywood through movies are very compelling, and they stick with us more than logic, because humans are fundamentally driven by emotion and feelings more than logic ever could be the case. And so that's just the way it is. And, you will waste your time trying to convince people otherwise that AI does not actually think. And, the instincts about the dangers of AI is real. But the reason behind the instincts is where things are off base, right? AI is a problem in the way that Many corporations and many groups are employing them, right? It is definitely a problem, but it's connected to a larger problem of how we have government set up, how we have society set up, how we have chosen to put our cultures together, and how we relate to each other in an organized fashion. So the way our jobs are structured, the way our businesses are structured, the way our governments and our communities are organized and set up, it's not the right way for the flourishing and the prosperity of humans. And so, just like the debate around guns, right? Guns in and of themselves are not bad. It's the intent behind the guns. Because with the right intent, guns can be used to save lives and prevent the destruction of people's property. But in the wrong hands, it can do the opposite, right? And so it's the same way with AI. It's a very powerful tool that in the right hands and with the right perspectives can do some great things. So we are seeing some shifts in the world of AI. And there was one thing that I was researching recently. I thought I had heard a quote where Bill Gates had said, or is claimed to have said, that the first company to really get AI technology and integrate that into an operating system would take over and dominate. But despite all the research that I've done, I could not find that quote that I thought I had read or had heard at some point. But I did uncover something that was along the same vein where Bill Gates told the current CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, he said to the CEO of Microsoft, Bill Gates said, "Hey, this AI is the quickest way to burn $1 billion. It's one of the quickest ways to burn $1 billion." I was like, what? So Bill Gates knew what was up with the AI, because we are seeing companies that are getting tens of billions of dollars in investment, tens of billions of dollars in so-called market valuation and capitalization. But one of the things that is going wrong with that is those companies have not shown a return on investment, right? They have not shown that the AI tools that they have put together is increasing the profits of the companies and individuals that are putting them into practice. So that's a really tough thing, to spend money on AI and to not get the type of results you had hoped you would get. At an individual level, I'm in the same boat, because I spent almost 3 years with ChatGPT, and I was doing a $20 a month plan, and when I added up, I spent more on AI than I actually got back in return. So I didn't really get huge value for my money. What I did is I spent money on lessons about how to use AI, and it was more of a real world, organic, on the streets kind of education, right, that I did not intend. But in order to unlock more of the capabilities of ChatGPT, that was what was required. So the thing about that is I have these software programs that I've written. And I shouldn't say programs plural. There is one program in particular that I put a lot of effort on into. And that program is an RSS reader. I have many videos about that. In fact, the first videos on this channel talks about the RSS reader. So way back in 2009, I had decided that for my own personal computers that I was going to switch over to Linux. And I did that. And what is strange, or what is interesting about that is at the time, I was a highly active Microsoft .NET software developer. I was I was all in Microsoft technology. That was my career. That was my trade. That's what I did. And I was really good at it. One of the first .NET developers, one of the first people to adopt C Sharp back in 2000, 2001. And then when .NET was released in 2002, I was already building a project on it and moving things along with that. And so I was good on ASP.NET, Windows Forms, WPF, WCF, .NET Remoting, and all kinds of things like that. And so I had evolved with the C Sharp programming language and the direction that Microsoft was taking with .NET. But one of the issues that I had was I noticed that I had less flexibility, less freedom, and less room to maneuver when it came to technology when I was using just Microsoft technology. And I saw Linux as a more stable, more reliable, more capable system and environment for me to use. So I said, I'm going to do .NET as my career. At home, I'm going to use Linux. And so when I did that, I lost a lot of things. I lost the Microsoft programs that I knew so well because I have been using Microsoft technology since 1990, right? So I have been using Microsoft technology since 1990. And I did brief interludes into Red Hat Linux and Unix in 1999 and somewhere in that ballpark. But I stayed largely with Microsoft for close to 35 years. And so with that switch, I lost all of my my leverage when it came to managing an operating system. So I said, one of the things I really liked about using Windows was these RSS readers. I liked to keep up with my news in that way. So I said, you know what? How hard can it be to just make a RSS reader for Linux? There were some that existed, but they just didn't fit the way that I wanted to do things. So that led to me investigating how to build and create software in Linux. So I said, I want the software to be fast. I want it to be reliable. I want it to last. And my primary desktop technology that I used in Windows was WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation. I had mastered it. I had studied it in depth. I had used it effectively in complex real-world business applications. That technology did not exist in Linux in 2009. So by 2013, I was well on my way to building desktop applications in Linux using what was available in the Linux environment. Toolkits like FLTK, Fast and Light Toolkit. And then I said, okay, that's all right, but I don't really like that. So let me try SFML, Simple Media Framework Language, something like that. And then that kind of went, but then I said, let me use Allegro. Allegro, I spent quite a bit of time with. That is a video game engine. That's a video game engine. So it's like, you know what? I'm gonna use a video game engine, and I'm going to recreate scroll bars, text boxes, the whole 9 yards. I'm going to calculate the geometries. I'm going to do all this stuff. So that lasted maybe a good 2 or 3 years, and I was just heavy into it. And maybe there was some part of me that just really liked how different that was from my experience in WPF and other .NET frameworks like ASP.NET, where everything was handed to you, where you could just basically put the building blocks together as long as you knew logic really well and you knew how to architect and structure software, then you could use those systems to build things. But with Allegro, it was like, okay, I'm going to put all of the building blocks together from the ground up so that I could create something that was higher performance, something that I could control, and something that I knew I could recompile for different operating systems. That was part of my, building things that last. And then I said, okay, this is taking too long. So let me use something more productive. So I went back into investigations. Now, people who are very familiar with Linux would shout out, say, for that time, why didn't I use the Qt framework, which is a framework that is the equivalent of WPF on Windows. The reason why I didn't use the Qt framework is that there was always this question around licensing. It's the same reason why I didn't use Java. There was always this question around licensing and whether the plug was going to be pulled out, the rug was going to be pulled out from under you for using those particular technologies. Other companies like Adobe and others have used those to great effect, but there was so much change with those frameworks in terms of the licensing and also some of the things that they were exploring, such as using JavaScript merged in with C++, that I said, you know what? I see some issues there that I just don't want to touch that. So that's why I didn't use Qt. So then I said, let me try GTK-MM, because at the time I was using C++ 11, which was the new version of C++ that basically that moved in the direction of what you saw with languages like C# and Java, where you had more automatic management of memory. But in the case of C++, it wasn't garbage collected. It was more like resource acquisition as initialization, so that if I used a smart pointer or I used certain coding patterns, that the memory would be allocated, but then it would be reclaimed or given back once the scope of that code concluded, right? So I like those concepts. They were very familiar to me, coming from more of a managed software programming practice. But pointers were unavoidable, and I embraced the pointers. I went all in on that. And I was studying assembly language programming, computer architecture, and long story short, I went down that rabbit hole of low-level system programming, merged with some high-level abstraction concepts. So I started to see some daylight with my programming skills in that direction. And I had read so much, studied so much, and got so much into Linux programming that my whole mindset has shifted. So I said around 2022 or 2023, one of those years, I said, you know what? I had built this RSS reader in C++ using GTK, and I got all this stuff going. It's a production grade software application. I learned how to package it for Debian and for Red Hat or Fedora. And I had reached a point where I was even able to use auto tools. So I had learned all of this complexity, all of these mechanisms. I learned all of this, and I had become just a full-on C++ Linux systems developer. So then I said, you know what? Let me make the version of this in WPF. So I said, okay, let me see if my skills from the C++ world and the Linux world can transfer back into Windows. I had already proven that in a day job, but I wanted to prove this in a much more specific way in my personal project. So I did it, the project succeeded, and I had this Windows-only version of this RSS reader and a Linux-only version of this RSS reader. I tried cross-compiling the C++ version to Windows. It worked, but it didn't look right. So that meant that there would be a lot more effort that went into making this RSS reader software application look the right way across all the platforms, Windows, Mac, and Linux. So I said, okay, if I was going to prioritize what was my primary operating system? And that, of course, was Linux. Along the way, Microsoft had made the whole .NET technology that I was an expert in available for Linux. There was a .NET for Linux that was maintained by some developers, but it wasn't official. So nobody really embraced it entirely. So Microsoft purchased those developers and they became part of Microsoft. And then Microsoft did a reboot of .NET and made it where it could run on Linux, except for the desktop pieces. Only the web pieces, only the server pieces, only the back-end pieces. So I wasn't interested in that because I already had the skills to do all of that, right? I had did something in 2015 using this other .NET where I showed then and in 2007, yeah, you can build ASP.NET on Linux. So I was interested in desktops because there's something that you can do in desktops that you can't do in web. So had I known that Avalonia was being built on Linux as far back as 2013, I don't know if I would have went through the whole C++ hardcore Linux programmer journey. Don't know. I can't tell you that. All I know is that maybe, just maybe, if I saw real promise in Avalonia and .NET for Linux back in 2015, maybe I would have cut 10 years out of my journey. Who knows? But the journey is what the journey is. So that brings us to the present time and the real point of this discussion. So what I did was I said, okay, I see some possibilities with AI, or what we call AI, to accelerate software development. So in addition to writing my program in C++ on Linux and maintaining a version for Windows, I said, okay, well, let me just say this before I go forward. I don't really trust AI then or in the future with C++ development. So C++ development using AI was something that I was trying to concoct, right? I was trying to create like a custom GPT to do that, but it's not something that I ever deployed for this software application that I'm talking about. So this software application remained completely untouched by AI. Time will tell if I will be proud of that, but this WPF application, I rewrote it from scratch and I used AI for some parts of it, namely the RSS parser, right? So I said, I'll use it for that. And I had a lot of issues with that. That's actually in the videos that disclose what I was doing with WPF, right? And so I explain all of that there. So between my experience and the use of AI, I got the WPF application up and running, and I used the design from the C++ application. That design transferred over completely in terms of the sequence of operations, the names of the classes, the names of the objects, the way things were organized, right? It's only some small implementation details that would differ. Now, I was able to build the WPF application in a fraction of the time that it took me to build the C++ application. So then, last year, I did this little benchmark study, just my own little private benchmark. I said, okay, I wonder how fast is C# on Linux. So I was like, you know what? For scripting, like just writing these little utilities that help improve little things that us programmers do, or things that just help things in general. You know, it's easy to write those in .NET. So I was like, you know what? I wonder how fast C# would be versus using C to write little utilities. And my benchmark showed that, at least compared to C++, the people who have been working on the .NET engine itself have done some amazing work to where once a .NET application starts running, it starts evaluating itself and optimizing the code in real time to such an extent where you end up with faster code in a C# application than in a boilerplate out of the box C++ application. Comparing boilerplate to boilerplate, right? And so, yes, you can write some really intricate, in-depth C++ code that using some C knowledge that no program can touch. That part is true. But when we're talking about applications development, which is different from kernel development, which is different from deep systems programming, when we're talking about applications development, building desktop applications, building web applications, right? Because there's nothing wrong with building a web application in C++ if you're using smart pointers and references and, really good techniques. But from an application standpoint, application development standpoint, the C# applications outperform the C++ applications when you're comparing apples to apples. So I said, oh, well, that just greenlit me to reconsider some things that were previously, or that I thought were previously not an option for me. That is to use my 20 plus years of C# skills, .NET knowledge and intuition, all the books I read on .NET. It's game time for me to just use that and really clean up in the Linux environment, right? So I said, the first step for me to accomplish that is to see if I can do Avalonia. I already have a WPF application. So WPF is Microsoft's desktop programming kit for Windows. It's Windows only, but it's amazing. In my view, it's amazing. I like WPF a lot. And Avalonia is like the same thing, but for Linux and Mac as well as Windows. So you can use the same kind of programming approach to building desktop applications that you would in WPF, but you're not restricted to Windows. You have a desktop application that could run everywhere, potentially, at least on Mac, Windows, and Linux. So, and it would do it in a very clean way, in a very consistent way. So you don't have to do all this hackery that says, well, if I'm on Windows, do this. If I'm on Mac, do this. If I'm on Linux, do this, right? You don't have to do as much of that hackery. And you can write cleaner code, faster code, and so I said that would be a great thing. And so, like from my other videos, life happens with me, and so I don't really get to accelerate on these things the way that I want. So I would have loved to have made the switch to Avalonia in June of last year, but that just wasn't possible. There were a number of events in my life where I was like, okay, that is on my to-do list. But so then I said, okay, I had promised myself that I won't let 2025 pass without making this switch. So I said, you know what? Let's try to use AI to at least get into the game on that. So I have a WPF application. WPF and Avalonia are similar, right? And if I can convert my RSS reader application that I wrote in WPF over to Avalonia, then I have a really good chance of doing some interesting things, right? So I used ChatGPT 5.3 extended thinking to try to one-shot convert my WPF application over to Avalonia. Now, some would say, oh, you shouldn't have did that. That's where you made your first mistake. But here's the thing about that. I have been able to get ChatGPT to one-shot produce production-grade, fully capable software programs in 2025. I had no issue with that. I developed the techniques, the prompt, the context, all of that to be able to pull that off. And and it would do it in a variety of ways for me. It would print it in line on the screen, or it would generate a zip file. So I said, you know what? So maybe that created a blind spot for me. Now, granted, these programs were just CLI programs, console programs, right? They're just programs that like you run on a command line. They have a single task, right? And so, yeah, it one-shot created C#.NET programs for me that were simple, maybe no more than 5,000 lines of code. Okay, maybe less than that, right? Let's say 2,000. And I had good specifications for those, and they're the type of programs I've written myself dozens of times. So it was easy to just articulate that on the fly, off the cuff, and have it build it for me. But I guess the difference was that when it's generating the program from just a verbal or from a written description, and it can take liberties with how it generates the code so long as it's not held to a certain standard in the form of an existing program, then maybe it works better. Here, I had an existing program, and I knew the program worked. I used it as a daily driver. I knew how every line of code worked. I wrote the code. Even the parts that AI helped me generate in the past, I took ownership of and modified and evolved, right? Correct, improved, smooth over. So I knew the program from top to bottom. I built it from the first line of code to code line number 5,000. So I said, okay, all the AI had to do was take the concept in WPF and map it over to the concept in Avalonia. You got dependency object in WPF, you got Avalonia object over in Avalonia, right? You got a XAML in WPF, you got a XAML over in Avalonia. Just copy it over here, but the way that it's supposed to be in Avalonia. Sounded simple to me, but it just couldn't do it. It couldn't do it in one single pass. It couldn't read all that code and then make the equivalent program. That was outside of its capabilities. But I didn't know that at the time. So I kept bumping my head against the wall trying to get this to work. So then I used DeepSeek. After 30 hours of failed attempts, I used DeepSeek, and I was able to get that translation done. But the story is not over yet, because I thought I was finished once DeepSeek helped me get a version of the program that I'd spent nearly 13 years on, translated to Avalonia, and the program ran. I don't know if I demonstrated that in a previous video, but I will demonstrate that in the next video. I got the program to run with the assistance of DeepSeek in Avalonia, And for the very first time, I had a .NET desktop application that ran in Linux. And it was remarkable. I was like, yeah. But there were subtle flaws. There were subtle bugs. And they were not immediately obvious when you looked at the code. You could just look at the code and it's like, oh, okay. Oh, all right. Got everything moved over. But when I needed to refine just something small, make a small tweak, it started to fall apart. Either something would crash, or something would cause the whole program to crash, or something just wasn't working, or in one instance, I had what I call a double delete. I click on a row, and I click the delete button, and it would not only delete the item that was selected, but it would delete the next item. And there was a split second where I said, there's no possible way the AI made the mistake, but it was like, it just maybe just a fluke of some kind, right? And you're not really supposed to use that language or that thinking as a software engineer with considerable experience, because everything's explainable. So I've been refreshing my .NET knowledge, right? I have 24 years of .NET study and application, 24 years of it. But, I had stopped at a certain point and just coasted on what I knew. And things had changed since the time I had stopped, right? And so what ended up happening was there were new ways of writing .NET code. There were new conventions and new perspectives that I needed to, well, I didn't need to. I mean, it's my personal project. But I began to see value in some of the new conventions. And so I've been reading about these newer conventions and newer ways of writing .NET code and putting software together. So I said, as I was building up that acumen again to be able to speak about present day .NET concepts, that also reactivated my .NET mind, my C# mind, technical mind, to a level where as I started to go in there and refine the code myself, change the code, right? Not ask the AI, oh, how do you do this in .NET 9 and C# 13 or .NET 10 and C# 14? No, I don't ask the AI that question. I got the books, here, this is just a cover. But anyway, OtterBox cover to my tablet. But I got the books, I read the books, and I say, I'm going to apply that. So now I'm much more literate in LINQ. I'm much more literate in patterns, pattern matching, using the is statement with if statements. I'm much more read and capable with the null operators. I've used records, converted the project to records. I did all of this after the AI conversion. And so it's taken me about 3 to 4 weeks to make these conversions, to make these changes, because, I'm working and all that. And so, but when I have time off and when I have energy, then I'm working on these things. I'm making these tweaks, which when I show them in the next video, will look pretty good. But the thing I learned, and where we're going with this discussion, is that no matter how good your prompt is, no matter how well you specify your conditions for the AI, it's going to miss something. It's going to miss some important things. And it is very capable of producing things that look like they work, but they don't work all the way. And they don't have the type of seams, the seam fitting, or the reinforcements. They don't have the type of reinforcing code that would make the program reliable and trustworthy. It's just pattern matching, what the AI does. And you use the pattern matching to your benefit, right? You know that it knows what was published on the internet, and you use that to your advantage to accelerate the creation of boilerplate code, the code that you just want to start your project off with, right? That's what it's really good at. But that's also why it's not a replacement for a software developer. The reason why it's not a replacement for a software developer is software developers are people, and have all the modes of thinking: critical thinking, reasoning, creative thinking, great induction and inference, and intuition and insight. And intuition and insight might seem the same as inductive reasoning, but they overlap. There is an emotional and culturally aware, situationally aware component to intuition and insight. Wisdom is not something you can program. So, we want to accelerate some of the work that we do. We want to have a good baseline of quality, but that's all it is the generation of text, the creation of text and output, images, whatever. All it is creating that. But if you see that as the finished product, then you will see yourself in a less competitive position. So, real software skills and critical thinking, judgment, and logic and understanding is still required, because what people are calling AI, it is incomplete. It's good. Yes, it can imitate very capably a customer service dialogue. So yes, it can replace customer service where it's a very routine or very repeatable scripted type of interaction. Even scripted that has some flavor to it, some variety to it. But when it's not that case, where it's something that's more complex, that crosses the boundary into something that's new, something that you can't predict very easily, where you have to make real-time intuitive judgment, that is not the place for the AI. So that's one of the things that I see with all of this, is that we have some benefits that we can gain from the AI, but we also need to be aware that if you allow your skills to decline or to take a break, then when people start to see a real need to have remediation and correction of AI output on a regular basis, then you're not going to be one that can contribute meaningfully to that process. Right? And the other thing that you have to consider is that when it comes to software development, there's always been these discussions about AI replacing developers. This is not a new conversation at all. What it is that back in the 1950s, the NATO Conference on Software Engineering helped create this concept we call Waterfall methodology. So there's a lot about software engineering and technology that comes out of the military, comes out of the Department of Defense. And there's always been a pendulum from we want a regimented, highly structured, highly planned out, fully understood battlefield and way of responding to threats, situations that we see in the future so that we have greater security. And when you translate that over to the corporate world so that we have a competitive advantage that we can preserve and maintain moving forward. The pendulum on the other side is like, what you have with Iraq 1 and Vietnam. Guerrilla warfare, agile, highly flexible response to, situations, being able to, adapt and respond to threats and situations with great wit, with great cleverness, with great insight, with great mobility, right? It turns out you just need both. You just got to find out the right mix, right? And so it's comfortable to say, oh, it has to either be waterfall or it has to be agile. Waterfall slowed you down and, was too much process. And agile speeds you up and allows you to say yes to people, but allows you to mess up more often. And both extremes are wrong. And that's the thing with AI, with specifications and vibe coding. Specifications is simply specifications versus vibe coding versus not using any of those. It's the same old conflicts from 20 years ago, 40 years ago, and 70 years ago. It's the same old conflicts. History repeats itself. And the more that we can understand history and understand what the cycle is and what the cycle is about, the more that we can navigate it and say, well, you know what? I know what position I'm going to take up, right? And for me, the position I take is one that's more in the middle, right? I know people tend not to like that. People do tend to like extremes, right? Because extremes are easier to latch on to. But I think the middle course is actually the more advised course, because there is merit in waterfall and agile, the right pieces of them. Just like there's merit in specifications and vibe coding. Vibe coding is good for prototypes and getting an idea and to get your thoughts together in a way where you say, oh, I can actually see it. And I can say, oh, I definitely don't want that. Or, if only we added this, right? And then you move from that to saying, okay, I need more of a specification for this or that, but you don't have to go all the way through with that. You say, okay, well then, now I got a fuller picture. Now, let me just build this. I can still generate some parts of it from AI, but I'm going to guide this, right? And guide this to a good level of quality. The best software applications that come out in the next years that use AI will have that perspective, right? The best software developers will be those that don't use AI coding in Cursor or Visual Studio like it's some IntelliSense on steroids, right? Because even IntelliSense was a crutch, right? IntelliSense, remember when you just typed a period and Visual Studio would show you what the members are on a class, the properties and all that? That actually slowed a lot of developers down and didn't make you as good of a developer as you thought, right? And so being able to program on the command line with a plain text editor that does not do code completion is a good way to build your software development skills at a very fundamental level. No one says you have to do it like that all the time, 24/7. But doing that more often keeps you strong, keeps you lucid, keeps you vibrant in how you program and how you code. So those are my general perspectives on that. I always have some kind of like script that I think I'm gonna read, and then I'm like, you know what? I can't sit here and just read this. you know, um, I don't know why I still do this. Maybe it just helps me collect my thoughts together. But oh, I just ran across something here that I did forget to mention. So here's what I forgot to mention. One of the issues, and this is the last thing I'm gonna mention, but it's very important. One of the things that we have not appreciated enough with this AI is that it is trained on things that have been published in the public, things that a large number of people know about. So what that's going to lead to is something that I call a software freeze. If you use too much of the AI for software development, you're actually generating obsolete code. You are generating code based off of the last version of React, the last version of .NET, the last version of Java, the last version of this or that. So all of the things that make your code and makes your software application a unique competitive advantage are things that AI cannot assist you with in terms of actually generating the code. So those organizations that rely too heavily on AI is simply using a shortcut to do things the way that we've always done them. And there is less room for innovation in that process than what we had previously when we talked about frameworks that locked us in, right? So the AI is trained on the frameworks and the APIs, which were themselves designed to lock you in. So you're going to be locked in even more using the AI. So if you have the right judgment and the right balance, you can navigate that better. But know that for the majority that rely heavily on AI, it's going to set up what I call a software freeze. So people say, oh, the AI can generate all this software for free now, and it threatens open source. It does not. What it does is it puts those who have not done the work personally to cultivate their skills at a disadvantage versus those that you might think they're slower than those that are not using. You may think that those that continue to invest in their skills in a conventional way where they're studying their algorithms, their data structures, they're studying the actual software syntax, the actual frameworks, the actual tools. You may think that people who continue to study and work on that would be a disadvantage versus those who say, I'm just going to use all this AI and I'm going to think and I'm going to make all these decisions and I'm going to have it just spin out these processes for me. You might think that the first group is at a disadvantage, but they're not, because that group will still be able to create things that that second group simply cannot. And see, that first group, the ones that keep their skills up, they can still use AI. They just don't use AI to a level where it weakens their ability to stretch beyond the boundaries of AI at a moment's notice, in a pinch. So that's what I got to say today on this February 16, 2026. It is now almost 7 p.m. And I got another video that I'm definitely doing. I was going to do that video today. I don't know if I'm going to work on it today. because I do get tired when I do these videos. I'll just be honest about that. But I definitely have a video that I'm doing next. It is going to be my last video for a while, because what I'm going to talk about in this next video is something that is the bridge for me to really lock the F in and get some things done. And I'm pretty excited where I'm at right now. So until that video comes out, until we talk again, I will see you on the next one, where I will talk about some Claude. I will talk about some actual software code and some other things that, at least for documentation purposes, I will have on this channel for those that find it useful, and for my future self who will find this as a useful turning point in my life. Thank you.